This week's Parshat Metzora continues with the laws of tzoraas. This took up almost the entire Parsha last week, and now half of this week's Parsha. One interesting point to me is how the Torah talks so much about tzoraas, but it's bracketed by the laws of tumah related to reproductive system or sexual activity. Last week's Parsha started with the laws of tumah for a woman that gives birth, and then this week's Parsha ends with the laws of nida and zav. The connection is very glaring because it's not just that the subjects of tzoraas and sexual-based tumah are next to each other in the Torah. In this case, the Torah starts with the subject, then goes into a very long detour into tzoraas law, and then comes back to the subject. This is what they call a sandwich here in Israel, for those of you that think I haven't learned the language yet. It's well known that tzoraas is caused by lashon hara, evil speech. In fact, the episode of Miriam getting tzoraas was in punishment for her talking lashon hara about Moshe. What's the big deal about lashon hara anyway? Why does the Torah devote so much time to tzoraas, the result of lashon hara? And what's the connection between tzoraas as a negative result of evil speech and tumah as a result of reproductive system or sexual activity? Another very significant connection between negative speech and sexual activity is the episode of the sin in the garden. The serpent spoke lashon hara about God to Chava, and then after the sin, when God started asking questions, Adam blamed Chava, Chava blamed the serpent, and according to tradition, one of the reasons the serpent caused this sin is because he was jealous of Adam and wanted Chava for himself. Also, according to tradition, the serpent had relations with Chava, and this is what caused the changes to our physical beings manifested by the long and painful childbirth process. So we see again a very clear connection between these two things, evil speech and sexual activity. What's the connection? So in these Dvar Torahs, I've mentioned many times the importance in Judaism of sexual morality, and that this is really the foundation of our covenant with God. It's so foundational that our bris milah, the symbol of our covenant with God, and what's called the yesod or foundation in the sfirot, is cut into our body's sexual organ. All of our mitzvot are designed to connect us to God, and God is one, meaning the entire universe is encompassed within God. When we're properly connected to God, we're at one with the universe, as people refer to this phenomenon. Many Hasidim say a little prayer before performing various mitzvot that starts L'Shem Yichud Kudsha Baruchu Shechinte, for the unification of the Holy One in His divine presence, which they hope to do with their actions, with the mitzvah. We know that at a certain level, we conceptualize God, the Holy One, blessed be He, as in the masculine, and as Shechina, the divine presence, as the feminine, and that God as a whole encompasses both of these forces. But the divine presence is in exile with us in the physical world, while the Holy One dwells above and is in fact everywhere. When we perform mitzvot with the proper intentionality and consciousness, we connect the upper spiritual world and lower physical world, thereby connecting God and His divine presence, at least in our own microcosmic universe. As we know, the Gemara says everyone is their own universe. And if people do this enough in their own universe, that if this affects the common ecosystem that we all occupy. There is no greater physical act or mitzvah than marital relations when performed in holiness, love, and proper intentionality that serves to connect God and His divine presence, the upper spiritual and lower physical worlds, the masculine and feminine, and man and wife. This was literally the first mitzvah given to mankind, right after we were told we were created in the image of God. There is also no physical act that has more ability to cause mankind to descend into the pits of hell and be more animalistic than this one when it's removed from all positive emotion and intimacy. Because this physical act in the way that we now experience it was caused by the sin of the serpent, there is always an element of impurity associated with it. Indeed, the Gemara tells the story that the rabbis wanted to remove the yetzer hara, or evil inclination, for illicit sexual activity. And when they did it, chickens stopped laying eggs and married life stopped. So you see, so they put it back. They actually put the yetzer hara back in. So you see this act has the serpent's influence within its very makeup. This element of impurity is the root of the tumah caused by childbirth and the root of the tumah of any other reproductive system or sexual activity. Can evil speech be this important? So we understand that there is the world of action and physicality, and there are also other worlds, the world of the intellect and spirit, for example. In the same way that there is no more physically intimate act than marital relations, there is no more intellectually intimate act than sharing a thought with someone that results in their changed perspective or actions. You hear teachers talk about planting seeds, and it's not an accident that this language is used metaphorically. Language is what distinguishes us from the animal world more than anything else because it is our way of interacting on this intellectual plane which animals do not share with us. Before the serpent was able to defile Chava physically, he defiled her intellectually with his evil and manipulative talk. The thought and emotion always comes before the action. So the tongue represents for the intellect what the bris milah represents for the physical body. The ability to interact with the outside world through holiness and goodness, and thereby create unity and oneness, or God forbid, interact hatefully and maliciously, creating hatred and strife. In our modern world, with the explosion of social media, evil talk has become the norm. But if we go back to basics, all the way to our creation story, we see that the root of all evil in our world was the serpent who injected his venom into Chava, the mother of all living things, as Adam called her, both intellectually with his lies and manipulative words, and then physically with his relations. Every time we talk Lashon Hara, we are injecting evil into the relationships between people, which causes disconnection and separation and chaos. There is no greater damage to God's plan than this, because God created us to bring order and togetherness to his creation, and thereby demonstrate his oneness. And instead, we are channeling the serpent, creating chaos and tearing his creation apart. I want to bless all of us that we use all of our bodily organs to proclaim God's oneness in the world, as the beautiful Nishmas prayer says, Kol atzmosai taimarna, all my bones proclaim your oneness. Shabbat Shalom from Renana, Israel.